Welcome to this deep dive on the WeCyberYou Unlocked podcast. I'm so glad you could join us today. Before we really jump into the analysis, and we have a lot to get through, please take a second to hit the button to follow the channel.
Yeah, definitely do that.
And be sure to visit WeCyberYou.com for more content and resources, just like the discussion we are having today. So today we are looking at a very specific, really fascinating stack of notes covering the Qatar Personal Data Privacy Protection Law Framework.
Right, specifically Law Number 13 of 2016.
Yes, exactly. And the mission for this deep dive is really to unpack this framework because, honestly, in our rapidly expanding digital economy, well, let me ask you this. How is your personal information actually shielded? When you interact with all these digital services every day, there's a whole underlying structure dictating how your data is handled.
And that's exactly what this deep dive is about. It's not just about dry legal compliance or checking boxes. We are looking at the fundamental building blocks of trust in online transactions and digital services within Qatar.
Trust is the operative word there, I think.
Absolutely, because when we analyze Law No. 14 of 2016, we are really examining the architecture of that trust. A digital economy relies entirely on participation. If you, as an individual, lack confidence in the security of your information, you hesitate to engage.
Right. You just don't click buy or you don't sign up for the app.
Exactly. And that stagnates the entire digital ecosystem. So the core aim here is protecting individual privacy, regulating how organizations handle data, and ensuring lawful, responsible use. All of that is to maintain that ultimate confidence.
Which makes total sense. So let's talk about the who for a second, because the sources are very clear on who this framework actually applies to.
Yeah.
It targets organizations operating in Qatar that process personal data electronically or through automated systems.
And that phrase automated systems is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Oh, massive. Because we aren't talking about, some guy manually typing your name into a spreadsheet anymore. Think about automated systems like a giant digital sorting facility behind the scenes of the internet. Your data is being boxed up, scanned, and routed on conveyor belts at lightning speed without human eyes ever seeing it. We are looking at complex algorithms, machine learning models, and massive data lakes that process information in milliseconds.
Right. And the inclusion of that term means the law fully anticipates the reality of modern tech stacks. An organization cannot claim exemptions simply by saying, well, human hands never touched the data.
Yeah, the computer did it. The excuse doesn't work.
It really doesn't. If a company uses software to automatically parse user behavior or route information, they fall under this jurisdiction. The framework recognizes that the most significant privacy risks today actually come from the scale and speed of that automated processing.
Okay, so that brings us to the data itself. What are these automated systems actually processing? The text defines personal data as any information that can identify a person, either directly or indirectly. And the direct ones, those are obvious.
Right. The sources list your name, your address, your email, phone number, identification numbers, the stuff you'd see on a driver's license.
Yeah, exactly. But the inclusion of indirect identifiers is where the scope of this law gets highly technical and, honestly, super interesting. The sources specifically call out online identifiers and location data,
which completely changes how organizations must audit their data streams. Let's look at location data as a perfect example of this complexity.
Let's do it. Because I think people assume if their name isn't on it, it's anonymous.
Right, and that's a dangerous assumption. Say a data set consists entirely of GPS coordinates and timestamps. Not a single name attached, just numbers. However, if those coordinates consistently show a phone resting at a specific residential address overnight...
Like where you sleep.
Yes. And then it shows that same device traveling to a specific commercial office during business hours every single weekday. That data indirectly identifies an individual. It maps perfectly to a real person's life pattern.
It's mapping to you. Even without your name, it is undeniably you. And online identifiers present a very similar operational challenge. We're talking about IP addresses, device fingerprints, tracking pixels, cookies.
All those invisible things tracking you across the web.
Exactly. A string of alphanumeric characters used to track your phone or laptop across different websites builds a comprehensive behavioral profile. So even if the organization holding that profile doesn't know your actual name, they know your habits, your preferences, your routine. They possess a digital fingerprint.
And historically, organizations treated that indirect pseudo-anonymous data as a free-for-all. They just aggregated it without restriction because, hey, it didn't contain a phone number.
Right. It was fair game.
But Law Number 13 of 2016 closes that gap completely. It forces organizations to treat a device ID or a set of GPS coordinates with the exact same level of security and compliance as they would a national identification number.
That is a massive shift. So if an organization holds this kind of data, direct or indirect, the framework lays out 4 golden rules or key obligations they absolutely must follow. And I really want to spend some time here. The first one is consent.
The foundation of it all.
Right. The baseline rule is that personal data generally cannot be processed without the individual's consent unless a legal exception applies.
And we really need to analyze the weight of that word consent. It establishes a strict boundary of ownership. It dictates that you, the data subject, have agency over your digital footprint. By establishing consent as the general rule, the law forces organizations to clearly articulate what they want to do before they do it.
It effectively eliminates silent data harvesting. It shifts the default from opt-out to opt-in. You can't just scrape my data because your tech allows it. You have to ask me first.
Exactly. Now, there is that caveat regarding legal exceptions, which is important to mention. It acknowledges that in certain functional or legal scenarios, absolute upfront consent might not be feasible, like for law enforcement or certain critical functional tasks, but the burden remains entirely on the organization to justify that exception.
Okay, so once they actually secure that consent from you, the second rule kicks in. Purpose limitation. The framework states that data must only be collected for specific, clear, and legitimate purposes.
This is one of my favorite aspects of the law because it's so practical.
It really is. Let's use a fun hypothetical based on this. Say you are downloading a new app for an online shoe store. You just want to buy some sneakers. To fulfill that order, the app requires your mailing address, your phone number for delivery updates, and your payment details.
Which makes perfect sense. That is a specific, clear, and legitimate purpose.
Right. But if that same shoe store app suddenly requests access to your phone's health records or wants to log your background, GPS coordinates 24/7.
Even when you aren't ordering shoes.
Exactly. They have totally overstepped that limitation.
Yeah.
They don't need your heart rate to sell you a pair of boots.
And that principle combats data hoarding. In the early days of the digital economy, the strategy was just grab everything. Collect every possible data point under the assumption that it might be monetized later. Purpose limitation renders that strategy non-compliant. If an organization defines its purpose as delivering a specific service, the data collection must stop at the boundaries of that service.
Even if I initially clicked yes to everything.
Yes. Any data gathered beyond that scope violates the principle if the purpose is not explicitly defined and legitimate according to the service provided.
That is so important for people to understand. Okay, moving to the third obligation. Data security. Organizations must implement technical and organizational safeguards. The sources list 3 specific threats that they have to mitigate: unauthorized access, loss or destruction, and disclosure or misuse.
The distinction between technical and organizational safeguards is critical here. It's not just about buying good software.
Right. Break that down for us. What is the difference?
A technical safeguard might be end-to-end encryption or multi-factor authentication. It's the digital lock on the door. But an organizational safeguard addresses human and structural vulnerabilities. A robust technical perimeter, a giant steel vault, is completely useless if an internal employee with valid credentials just props the door open.
Oh, for sure. Or misuses the data they are allowed to see.
Exactly. So organizational safeguards involve internal access controls, rigid data handling policies, and mandatory employee training. It means employing the principle of least privilege.
Which means only giving people exactly what they need to do their specific job, right?
Spot on. Ensuring that an employee only has access to the specific data necessary for their role and nothing more. Defending against unauthorized access means keeping external hackers out, but defending against disclosure or misuse heavily relies on internal organizational discipline.
Now, there's an inherent friction here that the sources point toward when we look at the requirement to protect against loss or destruction. Because guarding against loss usually dictates making robust, immutable backups, right? You duplicate data to ensure it survives a server crash.
Right, standard IP practice.
But, as we're about to discuss with individual rights, people can ask for their data to be deleted. So how does an organization balance the mandate to maintain comprehensive backups against the need to selectively purge data if consent is withdrawn?
That operational tension is honestly one of the most complex aspects of compliance. If a user revokes consent, the organization must remove their identifiers. Doing so on live, front-end servers is pretty straightforward.
Just hit delete on the active database.
Exactly. But digging into heavily encrypted, compressed disaster recovery backups to purge a single user's indirect identifiers without compromising the integrity of the entire backup system, that requires highly sophisticated data architecture. The technical safeguards have to be granular enough to support both preservation and targeted deletion simultaneously.
Which sounds incredibly expensive and difficult to build, but that's what the law requires. Which brings us to the fourth key obligation, which ties all these internal processes to the public face of the organization: transparency.
The what, why, and how.
Yes. The framework requires that individuals must be informed about what data is being collected, why it is being collected, and how it will be used. This is the operational reality behind all those privacy policies and consent banners you see.
And transparency is what prevents the asymmetry of information that we used to see all the time. The user provided data but had zero visibility into the back-end processing. Mandating the what, why, and how requires organizations to actually be intelligible.
Meaning they can't just hide behind a 70-page legal document filled with jargon.
Right. A highly technical document buried in the terms of service often fails to meet the standard of clear transparency. To build that trust we talked about at the beginning, the organization must communicate its data practices in a way that allows you, the individual, to make a truly informed decision.
Okay, so let's shift the focus completely to the individual, to you listening right now. Because the sources outline specific rights granted under this framework to empower the individual and give them control over their personal information. You have the right to access your personal data, the right to correct inaccurate information, and the right to withdraw consent.
Which effectively hands the power back to the user.
Exactly. The right to access forces organizations to open their black boxes. You can demand to see exactly what direct and indirect identifiers are attached to your profile.
And then the right to correct inaccurate information has massive real-world implications, particularly when those automated systems are involved.
How so? Like if an algorithm gets it wrong?
Exactly. Let's say a financial algorithm or a housing portal is making automated decisions based on your data profile. An error in that profile can result in an unfair denial of services. You could get rejected for a lease because of a bad data point. Giving you the legal mechanism to force an organization to rectify errors ensures that the data economy operates on reality, which mitigates the harm caused by flawed automated profiling.
That is huge. And then there's the right to withdraw consent, which is basically the ultimate fail-safe. It means your agreement is not permanent. If a company changes its business model, or if you simply decide you no longer trust an app with your location data, you can revoke the key. But enforcing that withdrawal leads us to one of the most challenging parts of this: cross-border data transfers.
Oh yeah, the global nature of the digital economy makes this incredibly tricky.
Right, because data rarely stays in one physical jurisdiction. A company based in Doha might utilize a customer relationship management platform hosted in Europe, and they might use cloud storage infrastructure physically located in Asia.
And if Law No. 13 of 2016 only applied to servers physically bolted to the floor within Qatar's borders, it would be entirely ineffective.
It would be a giant loophole. So the text states that organizations must ensure adequate protection exists before sending data to another country. But how does a local organization practically enforce its local compliance standards on a massive multinational cloud provider? They are essentially required to pack the Qatar legal framework into the data packets before they even cross the border.
It's a fundamental shift in legal accountability. The Qatari organization cannot outsource its compliance. They can't just point fingers at the cloud host. If they choose to use a global provider, they must establish contractual guarantees and verify that the third-party infrastructure offers a level of security and privacy that mirrors Law No. 13 of 2016.
So if the foreign entity gets breached,
the regulatory scrutiny falls heavily on the organization in Qatar that authorized the transfer. They are responsible for ensuring that adequate protection isn't just theoretical, but functionally active wherever that data physically resides.
Which naturally brings us to the ultimate question, the stakes. What are the consequences of failing to meet these obligations? We've talked about consent, purpose limitation, security, transparency, individual rights, cross-border transfers. What if a company just ignores it?
The sources outline 3 distinct categories of penalties for organizations that violate this law: financial penalties, possible legal consequences, and regulatory enforcement actions.
And for massive multinational corporations, there's always that debate, right? Are financial fines large enough to force behavioral change, or do these giant tech companies just write it off as the cost of doing business.
And that's a valid debate. But while financial penalties draw the most headlines, the regulatory enforcement actions and legal consequences are what really elevate data protection to a boardroom priority rather than merely an IT budget line item.
Because regulators can actually disrupt operations.
Absolutely. Think about what a regulatory enforcement action practically means. If an action involves halting data processing or restricting the ability to transfer data across borders, the organization's ability to function in the digital economy is paralyzed. They literally cannot do business.
You can't just pay a fine to make that go away. Your servers are effectively frozen.
Right. Furthermore, legal consequences can result in protracted battles that damage an organization's reputation and standing within the region. So the combination of these three penalty categories ensures that compliance is a structural business requirement. It has serious implications.
It enforces accountability. If an organization breaks that architecture of trust we discussed, the structural consequences are severe. So, to really synthesize the sources we have covered today, Law Num 13 of 2016 on personal data protection serves as Qatar's tool for giving individuals greater control and regulating organizations to safely run the digital economy.
It's a comprehensive ecosystem of rules.
Yes. It defines personal data broadly enough to capture those indirect digital footprints, like location data and online identifiers. It mandates strict obligations for organizations requiring consent, limiting purpose, enforcing security, and demanding transparency. And, crucially, it empowers individuals with the rights to access, correct, and withdraw their data.
It acknowledges that digital services rely on data, but it mandates that the extraction and processing of that data must be balanced against the fundamental privacy rights of the individual. And by regulating those cross-border transfers and establishing severe penalties for noncompliance, it really attempts to secure the perimeter of Qatar's digital economy in what is otherwise a totally borderless technological landscape.
It really is a dense but incredibly vital topic for anyone navigating modern digital infrastructure. Make sure you visit WeCyberYou.com to keep exploring essential topics like the ones we unpacked today.
Definitely check it out.
But before we close, I know we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder on your own.
Yeah, I'd love for the listener to think about this, building on the concept of cross-border data transfers we just discussed. Think about your own daily digital interactions. The next time you download a new app and casually click, I agree, consider the unseen automated systems running in the background. Think about your indirect identifiers, your device fingerprint, your network routing, your background location telemetry. How many international borders do those seemingly insignificant data points cross? And how many different jurisdictions do they bounce between in the milliseconds before that screen even finishes loading?
It's wild to think about. It is such a complex digital environment, and your data is constantly in motion. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and we will see you next time on the WeCyberYou Unlocked podcast.